call the public hearing and special city commission meeting for July 28th, 2015 to order. Can we call the roll?
Commissioner Foreman?
Here.
Commissioner Kuziak?
Here.
Commissioner Perry?
Here.
Commissioner Scott?
Here.
Mayor Metzger?
Here. No. First item on the agenda is public discussion, items not on the agenda. Is there anything that anyone wants to bring forward? Okay. Good. So now we'll move on to consideration of the purchase of real property, the reason we're here tonight. And Jim, could you give us a preview?
Sure. I have a short PowerPoint presentation that highlights what is being proposed and why it's being proposed, so I will run through that. I think as we all know, what's being proposed is the city purchase of 99 Kensington, which is this house right there. This is a map that shows the park properties, so we have Gainsborough and then Flynnfield, which then continues a little bit into Ferndale. We have the dog park property, of which, when you're at the dog park, half of the property is city property, half of it is MDOT property. And so the proposed purchase would create a connection between the two properties. Right now, this is about, I think, 0.3 miles if you walk from the terminus at Sylvan up to Kensington, and making this connection would increase that by about 35%. It'd be over half a mile of continuous park space that would run along the perimeter of the east side of the city. So the considerations, we have a purchase agreement with the property owners for $140,000. The process that was used is the standard process when a city or public entity, or even sometimes not-for-profit entity, is looking to buy land. We went through a third party to conceal our identity. When a city is buying property, it's typically not to buy a house. It's typically not to buy the structure. It's to buy the land. When you as an individual are shopping for a house, if you cannot come to terms, or if a seller is stubborn, you can go find a different house that meets your needs. But when the city is looking to buy property, we're interested in the land, and land is not fungible. Only this one particular property would provide the connection that we needed in a reasonable manner. Being right next to the railroad tracks, we are making the connection along the perimeter of the city. We're not making the connection between park space between houses. So this was a unique piece of property that really had no substitute for the city. The property owner put it on the market, and when it came to our attention that the house was on the market, the staff floated the idea by the city commission in a closed session meeting. One of the few reasons for going into a closed session permitted by state law under the Open Meetings Act is to consider the purchase of real property. Because the state recognized when they passed the Open Meetings Act that it would not do for cities to have to openly discuss purchasing property, because there has to be some way to manage the process. Once the City Commission gave staff the go-ahead to pursue purchasing the property owner had already signed a contract with a broker, so we worked with the seller's broker. We conducted an appraisal of the property to come up with what the fair market value was, so that we could make a fair offer to the property owner. And then once we had that appraisal back, we made our fair offer, and the property owner accepted that offer. The funding for this purchase will come from funds to be generated by the Parks and Recreation millage that was passed last November. It's also going to have no impact on the Gainsborough Park budget or general fund monies. This is a separate bucket of money that this is coming from, that's dedicated purely for park improvement purposes through the Parks Improvement millage. We were able to find some savings on the fence repair that was part of the initial budget that was used as a basis for the millage request last November when we went to the voters and asked for the park improvement millage. That fence was budgeted at about $200,000 based on the Parks and Rec master plan estimates that were put together. Subsequently, in January of this past year, after the vote, we found a contractor who was able to repair the fence in place, preserve the landscaping that was there, and that was a cost of $10,000. So right there we had a savings of $190,000 off of what our anticipated budget for the park improvement project was going to be. So that money was freed up, and we were able to repurpose that to purchasing this property with no real impact on, again, the Gainsborough project or the general fund. Again, the connection here is the value proposition for the city. By knitting together two currently non-contiguous and separated park spaces, we can connect all of the park spaces that are on the east side of the city. We can tie those together with walking paths. Eventually, we may be able to have a walking path that extends all the way from Indiana through the park all the way down to Sylvan at a half a mile. This is one of the highest things that people wanted to see in the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, so this is a value add. It will allow the city some new possibilities for the way we think about the uses that we have in the parks now and how we can reconfigure those in a way that's better. This was an item of discussion at the Gainsborough Park visioning process last week because it was known that this was a proposed purchase, so we were discussing and floating the ideas by all of the participants at the visioning sessions to basically gauge whether or not residents thought this was a good idea, and if they did think it was a good idea, what we should do to better use our space. So this was the first draft, I guess I'll call it pencil line plan for Gainsborough Park, which our consultants are going back right now and putting a finer point on that they'll bring back to us with cost estimates and some more detail on improvements. But what you'll see is the park extends from Sylvan, and they've shown the improvements that go all the way up to the north end at Kensington and beyond. And the key thing is right now this is where the community garden is, and that location. And so through the planning process it was determined that that would be a better location, and thank you, Jason,
I like
inspired me to add some features to my PowerPoint. But this was determined to be a better location for the community garden because, quite frankly, there's a lot of shade here, and this is in sun. And right now, when you go to the park, this feels like the northern boundary of the park. Because to get around the community garden, there's no pathway, and you have to kind of walk a little narrow path on either side around the garden, and then there's no pathway here, and then it just kind of ends at Kensington. So practically speaking, this feels like the northern boundary of the park. By moving the community garden, all of a sudden this is like gaining new connected park space that extends the park not only from the dog park, but then connects it all the way down to the end of Devonshire, picking up a new defined entry into the park at Kensington. We have the opportunity to add a few parking spaces at the end of Kensington, such as exists at Devonshire, to serve as dedicated parking for the community garden. The dog park entrance can move down to this side, where it's actually wider, where the dog park entrance right now is at the narrowest point of that park property. So by moving the dog park down here, it opens up some possibilities for us to rethink how we use the dog park. We could have two separate areas that we flip-flop back and forth with to allow the grass to recover. So you use one half in one season while the other one regrows. Or it allows you to maybe have a small dog area and then the big dog run. We can do some of the things that other dog parks have, and that's in large part because we've got a bigger, wider space here that makes it more feasible to do those things. And then we have dedicated parking for the dog park through a sanctioned sort of path that comes to the dog park, rather than the situation right now where it's not an optimal entrance into the dog park the way it's configured at the moment. So that was what came out of the visioning sessions for Gainsborough Park. Those were the considerations that we had when we pursued the purchase. At this point, we have a public hearing, and there's a requirement for a 4/5 affirmative vote by the City Commission to acquire property by charter. We have the purchase agreement. Our due diligence period ends on July 31st, which is, I believe, this Friday. If this is approved, we would close next week. If it's not approved, we would forfeit our cash deposit, and then the seller would be free to relist, and we would go on our way. So with that, I will turn it back to the Commission. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have, either now or after the public hearing.
Yes, question. Jim, you mentioned the funds for this would come from a separate bucket of money. The reason you use that term is that because it's basically money that we didn't expect to have. It's really from the same bucket, the recreation millage, but we plan for this money to be spent on something that now we don't need to spend it on, so we have it in surplus.
The bucket of money is the Parks and Recreation millage money. It's just that that bucket's a little more full now because we were able to save money in the fence that we thought we were going to have to spend.
Okay.
So that's the Parks bucket. The other one's pretty much the general fund, and that's completely held harmless by this.
Thank you.
Mayor, if I could, thank you, Jim, for that presentation and that creative use of the red rectangle. I really appreciate that. What I would ask you is, I know you've had our lawyer, our city attorney, Greg Need, look at the applicability of the Parks Improvement millage for these funds. Can you share with the residents what his opinion on the applicability of these funds are?
Of course, yes, we conferred with Greg Neat before we moved on any of this, just to confirm that he agreed that the millage language as it was written would allow for the purchase of property to be used for park space.
Mm-hmm.
And he did agree, based on his reading of that it did allow for the purchase of parkland with that millage revenue. So we proceeded accordingly.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have at this time, Mayor. Thank you.
Any questions down at this end? No? Anything else? Okay. With that, we will open the public hearing. If you have any comments to make, please come to the podium. Give us your name and your address, and give us your thoughts.
My name is Marcia Low-Fund, and I'm at 11 Oxford Boulevard. I'm here tonight because I'd like to express my concern about how business is being managed here. When you came to us last year, you asked us for $1 million for improvements at Gainesborough Park. We were told that you needed $200,000 to improve a safety concern, the fence that was falling down. And now we're being told that you miraculously were able to save $190,000 on that fence improvement. And I'm assuming that you did due diligence and got your estimates and had a good sense of what you needed to spend to improve that fence. And I'm here because I'm thinking, how are we so far off? Could you not have saved the residents a couple $100,000 when you asked us for this millage approval back then? Were we privy to all of the information that you had at the time? It's disconcerting that our money is being managed this way, and that estimates could come out so far from what the reality is in the end. So that's my concern. I have neighbors that could not be here tonight and asked me to come with a letter that they wrote, so I'd like to read that letter to you. Dear City Commissioners and Manager, last fall, in addition to an operating fund tax increase, the city requested the citizens of the community to vote on a parks millage for improvements to Gainesborough Park. Master plans were presented to the community in support of the millage. City leaders claimed a safety concern and pled for funds to repair a fallen fence, work that was estimated at $210,000. Now that the millage was approved, miraculously a contractor was found to do the repairs for $10,000. How could the estimate be this wrong without someone being held accountable? Had we known, we would not have had to burden residents with such a large tax increase, and residents may have voted differently if the facts were presented accurately last fall. Even if you ignore the way the citizens were misled, the city has many options now that there are more funds than originally thought. We have several parks in the city in need of work. We could defer spending to save for future needs. Instead, within months of the tax millage, the city is proposing buying a house to extend an already significant park. Another proposed benefit to the city is increased property values in a city that already has very high property values compared to surrounding communities. At what point do high tax rates reduce property values? One final point. How much financial gain does Robert Campbell make on this sale? Why should one citizen profit off of such a transaction at the expense of the entire citizen group? Clearly, the city and commission just likes to spend the citizens' money. After requesting a citizens advisory committee in the winter and spring of 2015 to review the state of the city manager and the commissioners quickly disregarded cost savings and revenue generating ideas presented from the committee. The CAC also recommended further financial review before a vote of the citizens. Instead, the city ignored the CAC's recommendations and pushed a vote, moving forward with their own objectives. Maybe we would have known the fence could have been fixed for $10,000 if the suggestions were followed. We expect fiscal responsibility from our city leaders, not story spinning to get pet projects approved. And this is from Jeff and Christy Hand at 8 Oxford Boulevard.
Thank you. Hi, Tom Troiter, 11 Oakville Park. Okay, for 11s. I was looking at like what the assets are for the purchase. We end up with a far more integrated design language from south all the way to the north border of the city. There's a continuous design that allows for better positioning of the community garden for the sun and better integrates the dog park with other components of Gainsborough Park. There are certainly more possibilities for walkway exercising, development of rest or communal areas along the walkway, and creating other public spaces and a more safe, I think, park experience with a more continuous lighting all the way from the very south to the very north end of the park. There have been criticisms levied about this decision being interpreted as somehow perfunctory. And I take that to mean hasty and not well thought out. And what has impressed me more than any other component of the proposed plan to date is that it's not only well conceived, but has integrated the thoughts the community has offered. The purchase of this property, if it had not been announced and openly discussed, would almost certainly have occurred at a much higher than market value rate. It would most likely have been prohibitively expensive, and the city would have been left with a park in 2 parts like we have now. So to that point, I can't imagine any scenario where that property at 99 Kensington would have been worth less to the seller. I think this is a good deal. A resident of Pleasant Ridge gets market value for the home they're selling. The community gets the advantages of a larger, much improved and integrated park space for a reasonable amount of money, and I hope that the commission finds good cause to approve this purchase. Thank you.
Well, 66 Wellesley. I just wanted to make a couple of comments about the dog park specifically. I think it's a good purchase to connect this. I think when I saw it, it made a lot of sense. As well as as far as in the planning stages, I know there's a lot of elderly residents that do attend the dog park, so I think it's optimal to keep both entrances at both ends because those residents are coming from basically the middle of Pleasant Ridge, funneling down Indiana. So that was my only comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did we have your name? I'm sorry.
Oh, Gerard Verga. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Rick Cook from 69 Amherst. I think this is a fantastic opportunity to, as other people have said, to connect a strong community almost spine on the east side of the city. It's going to be a fantastic opportunity for children, families, the elderly, dog walkers like me, tangent with the dog park comment at the end. I also think it's a great opportunity for the present owner of the property. I have been looking in Pleasant Ridge for a couple of years and had the opportunity to see that residence and consider it as a purchase when it had been on the market a couple of other times beforehand. I know that it's been on the market for quite a while. So this is a great opportunity for the homeowner to get market value and for the city to obtain a piece of property that would connect things. As the owner of a large dog, I would be strongly in favor of keeping a segregated area for small dogs only, and then a very large area for dogs to exercise themselves. I wouldn't necessarily be a fan of flip-flopping things for the sake of grass or foliage, where they're primarily for exercise. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else? Okay. Close the public hearing. Are there any other questions or comments from commission before we make a motion? Yes.
Just and I'm sorry, I missed your name.
Rick.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Marcia Pond.
Marcia, yes. I just wanted to double back on a couple of the
Good.
points she made. Robert Campbell, there is no fee. He did this pro bono for the city, so he graciously donated his expertise to us there. If we were to instead just reduce the millage, the $140,000, just to put perspective around this, it would result in about 0.1 mil reduction per house per year. So that would be the savings that we pass along to the residents. So 0.1 mils, it's anywhere between $10 and $20 for most houses a year. So that is the financial kind of, when you look at the reduction in taxes or the purchase, that's the impact over 0.1 mils for 10 years. And then the estimates for the fence, that came out of the Parks and Rec master plan. I actually can't really comment on how that was arrived at because I wasn't part of that process. That was done before we got here. So we picked up the estimates from the Parks and Rec master plan, which was done fairly recently. So I can't really comment on the estimates that were used to generate the $210,000 estimate for that.
Thank you. Any other? Yes.
You know, as we've been looking at improving Gainsborough Park, the purchase of this property is a permanent improvement for Gainsborough. This opportunity to expand and connect our green spaces is one of the best improvements that a small city, that's fully developed like ours can make. And that's one reason I'm excited about this opportunity here. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, just for me, I feel the same about this. I think this is a one-time deal. I think once the cat is out of the bag that the city would be interested in something like this, the opportunity disappears or the cost increases significantly. So this is something that came out of the initial recommendations from the park planners. We got their different proposals, and I think it was one or maybe two of them that had said, it'd be really cool to be able to connect those spaces together. It's just too bad you can't. And that kind of really changed the thinking. And then the house came up for sale. Maybe we could do that. Maybe, So that started a whole new train of thought that really we hadn't considered before. At least I hadn't. I was on the Recreation Commission when the Recreation Master Plan was generated. That was nothing we've ever talked about. That was, to me, expanding our horizons, and it was a completely new situation, something that the group that I was in had not considered before or discussed before. So to me, it was really exciting, and it still is very exciting. I think anytime we can increase our park space, since we have a lot of passive parks. We don't have a lot of active parks. That is going to be an active park. At least we hope it will be. And I think the residents have given their input, and that's something we're going to make sure it is. It's active, and it's usable for all ages, everyone across the city. So I think that's what this millage was all about. It's a parks improvement millage. Yes, there were certain things that were part of the initial plan, just like the Gainsborough plan was conceptual at that time. And now it will be tweaked slightly. We'll be adding more things. We'll be maybe taking some things out that we found weren't necessary. One of those is this fence repair that we were able to get, 95% more value out of somehow. And I agree, that is pretty convenient. But it is very convenient. It just happens to be convenience that happened that way. I don't know where that initial estimate came from. That was done before I was on the city commission as well. But that's the estimate that we had. I'm not sure how we came up with a $10,000 figure. Thankfully, the foundation was gracious enough to generate that money or donate that money to us. So that didn't come at any cost. Now we have still that, whatever that was, $200,000 that we can now spend on adding value to the park. I'm looking at more value than cost, just like I was with the millages initially. More about value than cost. This is going to generate value for future generations, many future generations, I believe, as long as we maintain it. And that's the plan, to maintain it. So I'm very excited about this potential. I definitely appreciate the concerns, though, because I could see that too. Like $10,000 out of $200,000, that's a huge change. Something smells fishy here. That's just what we saw. That's the number we had started with, and that's the estimate that we got, whatever, 2 years later. And I think it was a happy coincidence. At least in my mind, that's what it was. I don't know any different. So I thank you for your question and your concern. I think it was very good to ask that. But in the end, I see the value out of it, and I think that's what it was all about for me, the value to the community. Thank you.
Amy, did you?
No, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, have we received any other?
There was 3 correspondence that we received. or 4, I'm sorry. 3 were in favor and 1 was against.
I'm sorry.
Well, I apologize,
Sure.
Mayor. I just wanted to, I know Marcia had raised the point of the fence, and Jeff and Christy in their letter had expressed concern. Jim obviously wasn't our city manager at the time. Commissioner Foreman wasn't on the commission. Myself, I was on the recreation, I'm the liaison to the Recreation Commission. Scott Peterzak is our recreation director. And I can tell you a little bit about the history of the fence and the price that we arrived at 2 years ago on $200,000. When we started talking about what were the priorities to include in the recreation master plan, the safety and the fence as a barrier to keep people, particularly young children, away from the danger that the railroad tracks pose. So that was step number 1 in kind of blueprinting how we wanted to go forward with the recreation master plan. So in discussion at the recreation meetings, we talked about fencing. And the fencing conversation really hinged on how durable do we want to make this fence. I mean, we could continue with the chain link, and that's ultimately what happened, was a repair to the existing chain link. But at the time, conversations really focused on, let's make this as sturdy and as durable as we can to make it as long lasting, and to make sure that we don't have to revisit this down the road. So at the Recreation Commission level, we had design professionals who quoted us a range of options. So the lowest being just a repair of the fence, and at the time, it wasn't even in the neighborhood. Repairing the fence, I think, was like maybe $30,000 or $40,000. So that was kind of like our starting point. And then we went up incrementally to really the premium grade, impenetrable, sturdy, last 100 years fence. And members of the Recreation Commission who were involved in creating the master plan really wanted to move towards the premium fencing and really not have to address this against down the line. So at that point, we were looking at quotes in the neighborhood of 6 figures. So to include in a millage enough funds to really make that a reality, that's where I believe the $200,000 figure came from. Is if we're going to have to go, if we're going to decide that we want this premium fencing, it's going to be costly, not only for the fence and the actual materials and the installation and the construction, but also the removal of trees and existing landscaping throughout the entire length of the property there at Gainsborough. So in my mind, when I was sitting in on those meetings, $200,000 did not seem out of the realm of possibility. One thing I learned early on is that these municipal projects are very, very costly. So when we first started talking about playground improvements, I was fairly naive, and I said, let's raise $10,000 and put in playground equipment. And through conversations with Scott and previous city manager Sherry, I learned that it takes a lot more money for these projects. And so the figure that we arrived at $200,000, I can tell you that when I looked at the millage language and the ask and what we were asking residents to support, I mean, that was in that context. And I didn't include $200,000 and emphasize the safety of the railroad tracks to finagle any kind of millage or deceive any residents. At the time, I was fully expecting that a large portion of the funds generated through the Parks and Recreation millage were going to be spent on this fence. And in fact, when we first had the discussions about repairs, because of the history and because of the conversations that we had at the Recreation Commission level, I was just as skeptical as you. I couldn't really comprehend how we went from this one figure to where we ended up at $10,000. So the conversation at that point really transitioned into, do we want the premium prison grade impenetrable wall and have that figure really eat into our millage funding? Or do we want to look at just a satisfactory safety accomplishment at a lower price point? So that's where this commission came in and really changed the perspective, and with my concurrence, I mean, I feel like the money that we saved would be able to go into future improvements to the park, not knowing at that time even that the property at 99 Kensington was going to hit the market. So when the 99 Kensington property hit the market, knowing that we had saved a substantial amount of money on fence costs, to me that became a very unique moment in time that we could take advantage of or not take advantage of. And I felt like it was something that we were never going to really have the opportunity to bid on this property again. The opportunity, to me, was I feel too good to pass up for the long-term benefit of that whole park area. And just for kind of where I'm at, I could tell you that last year when we were writing, or we were agreeing on the language for the Parks Improvement Millage, had this house been on the market at that time, and had we had the figures for the fence, I would advocate that we include the figure for the price of the house in the millage ask. And so at the end of the day, whether it was last year or this year, I still see, me anyways, and I won't speak for any of my colleagues or our city manager, but I would advocate for a similar park. Now we're going to have dogs, right? And I wouldn't want somebody's dog to get loose and scurry under the fence and have something horrible happen to that family. So to me, the condition of the fence is a priority, and I am going to make sure that, you know, Jim and Scott and the people responsible for making sure that fence is secure, that we're maintaining that fence at an acceptable level. So
I would just add on that, it is secure, it is a safe boundary now. One of the considerations is when you go with the Cadillac fence option, the Cadillac fence option changes every however many years. And so that fence, if you were to rip everything out and put in an expensive fence, one of the considerations was, yeah, that's great, better for now. But when it comes time in 30 or 40 years that you're going to have to fix that fence too, because the fact of the matter is you've got trains and trees and everything else going along there and those damaged fences, that fence may not even be available to be fixed. So you'd be looking at having to do wholesale replacement again in the future. Chain link's always available. And that chain link fence lasted 30 years. So if we spend $10,000 every 30 years, we're so way ahead in the long run. But it is safe, it's secure. The whole perimeter is completely buttoned up now. So I don't want there to be any doubts that it's safe or secure, because it is.
Right, and my expectation was that it we'll never get to that point where it's bad ever again.
Okay.
That we're taking on the responsibility to maintain that fence,
Yes.
and make sure that it never gets in that condition again.
No, it was carefully analyzed and well documented in terms of every section of that fence, so I feel very secure. So. Yes.
Yeah, one last thought on the
Okay.
fence. I think if we wind the clock back to maybe the February or March commission meeting, we'll find discussion around the fence and how we went about understanding which pieces of the fence needed to be replaced, and the analysis we did to get to the $10,000 mark. I can't recall which exact meeting, but it was cold. I just remember it being cold. I'd also say that when we brought the millage forth, it was not communicated as a fence project, respectfully to everyone. It was communicated as a parks millage. And so that is what led to the millage amount that was requested. It was a parks improvement project, and we've been working diligently to use that money as wisely and as efficiently as possible. The fence is example of coming up with a clever way to save money and allow us to use that money in the most efficient way possible so that we get the most out of our dollars that we invest from our residents. And so that's really where the fence project came from. We looked at the money, we considered the options, and we said, let's figure out a way to make the fence safe, and that gives us the opportunity to use the money wisely elsewhere. We've also had the wonderful benefit of the foundation that's helped with the park, and that has also helped us consider this home purchase, which will make the park a better place. I'm actually in favor of the project as well. One of the reasons I'm in favor of that has not been described is that occasionally we have a water issue on Kensington, and the purchase of the house gives us the opportunity to consider some pavement technologies that may help absorb the water so that the residents don't have a water issue. So beyond the beautification of the park area and the more usefulness of the park, it also solves a problem that would be far more expensive to solve any other way. So I'm also in favor. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay. May I have a motion to authorize the purchase?
Your Honor, I move the City Commission authorize the purchase of real property commonly known as 99 Kensington, Pleasant Ridge, Michigan, for the price and terms as outlined in the purchase agreement dated July 7th, 2015, and that the mayor and the city clerk be authorized to execute on behalf of the city any closing documents related to this purchase.
Is there a second?
Second.
Can we take a vote?
Commissioner Kuziak?
Yes.
Commissioner Foreman?
Yes.
Commissioner Perry?
Yes.
Commissioner Scott?
Yes.
Mayor Metzger?
Yes, motion carries. The next item is other business. Is there any other business? Okay. And I have a motion to adjourn.
Mayor, I move that we adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.